And that is an extraordinarily dangerous thing, because one thing that history teaches us, if it teaches us anything at all, is that people will fight for their religion. People will shed their blood, and they will shed the blood of their children for their religion. And if you communicate to the world that this is a war on terror, a war on Islam, you guarantee more terror for this country. And that is the real risk.
Assuming the individual might understand your explanation, how would you respond to the email you just read us? And what kind of an explanation would you give that individual?
You know, I'm glad there's free speech in this country. That's the explanation. I know some people who get these emails and they actually try to engage the folks, and I just don't. I just don't. You know, and I've learned that the hard way, because I have to tell you, my father-in-law is one of those guys. I mean, but for the fact that he's my father-in-law, he could send one of those emails. And he just thinks what I'm doing is mashugana. And I can't get to, hey, heck, if I can't get through to him, I'm not going to get through to this guy.
I grew up during the Second World War, and we heard all about the Nazi tortures.
Yes.
And were horrified.
Yes.
And all I can think of, we're Nazis.
Yes. No. We're not, but I'm sorry.
Well, I think what's the difference in the tortures? I mean, this sounds even worse almost.
Yeah,
It's so psychological.
Right. The real link back to this, and I find this really fascinating, the real institutional legacy that these interrogation models, the psychological pressure comes from, is to Korea. The real refinement of interrogation lore, or how it was done, took place during the Korean War. That's where they sort of first made the leap from the more grotesque physical torture to this sort of psychological. And it's fascinating how you can trace this link, and it really is pretty conclusive. And in fact, there's no longer much of a dispute about it. My book was one of the first ones that really sort of made this, but it's now pretty widely recognized. But I am very careful, and I think it is a mistake, and I think it is historically inaccurate, grossly inaccurate, to liken this to a gulag. I never do that. I think that it's a mistake. I never say that this is anything like a concentration camp, or that these are like, or that we are behaving that way. I think that is tempting, but historically inaccurate and insulting to, and I don't mean to attack you at all, because many people who I respect a great deal use language like this. But Stalin killed millions. The best accounts are the number of people killed in U.S. detention since 9/11 is about 125. Now, some people say that's underreported. Some people say it's substantially underreported because they're, you know, manipulations of death certificates and so on. You know, and they say it's an accidental death and he's got the choke marks. And okay, maybe it's double. Maybe it's triple. Maybe it's off by a factor of 10. Maybe it's 1,200 people. It is insignificant compared to the horrors. Now, believe me, but you should know from what I just said, I'm not defending it. But I think it's very important that we be rigorous in our critique. Oh, absolutely. That's my point. I think that we should take no comfort from the fact that we're not as bad as Stalin. The question, it seems to me the question is not whether we are better than Stalin. The question is whether we are as good as we should be. One more, I gather? Ma'am.
Hi. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Dan Ellsberg. What you've described is a situation with, you know, chilling and very creditable life you've been leading. But what you described is a situation where, as I take it, we knew anyway, there are many people in the government, in every branch of service, you've said, and civilians throughout this, who regarded what was happening as not only a violation of the laws we have passed forbidding torture, and as well as international treaties, a violation then of the oath to execute those laws by the president and everybody associated with this, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and all the others, but immoral, ineffective, which is not a layman's judgment, but by these people, ineffective, and dangerous to the security of this country, in a dangerous world, in a dangerous, increasing our danger.
That's true.
How many people do you know of, and can you give us examples, of people who had this appreciation, who then acted on that, risking their clearances, their careers, their position in the government, by telling Congress and telling you and telling the public what we have needed and deserve to know about this situation? What whistleblowers have actually risked their careers by, as I would say, they should have all considered doing.
Joanne, are there any? I mean, the person that comes to mind is Alberto Mora. Oh, well, Diaz, although...
Valentine, we just heard about, who's just been convicted, right? I don't know what his sentence is.
Yeah, that's a very interesting case.
And he's kind of apologized for it. I thought he did exactly the right thing, I must say. Aside from that case, do you know of other cases? That would be an example of what I'm talking about.
Right. What he's talking about is the first JAG officer who was down there when lawyers started going to the base was a Lieutenant Commander Matthew Diaz. And Diaz was appalled at the, he was sort of our liaison when lawyers were start going down there after the decision in 2004. Diaz was appalled at the obstructionism that he perceived in the Defense Department resisting lawyers going there, because they were very hostile to, you should gather now, you should be obvious, they didn't want lawyers there because lawyers interrupted the milieu they were trying to create. And Diaz has just been convicted. This, by the way, is an answer to Mr. Ellsberg's point about it's not a crime. It is a crime if you're in the military. He mailed a list of the prisoners at Guantanamo to a lawyer at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and he was prosecuted for that and convicted. It is telling. It is telling. He was just prosecuted here in Norfolk. And for a while, I was listed as a defense witness. I ended up not testifying. The prosecutors asked, I mean, he was charged with very serious offenses. The prosecutors asked for 14 years. A military jury sentenced him to 6 months without losing his pay or his benefits. So the military did not perceive, the jury at least, did not perceive it as. But the answer to your question, I'm not aware of any others. The closest, there are people who have since come out, who have resigned from government, who have since come out and made their objections known. There are documents that we have secured that showed that they objected to it at the time, like Powell's memos and his former legal advisor, William Howard Taft. But no one who risked their career while it was going on.
Thank you for your comments this evening. They've certainly been illuminating and terrifying. We have in Tampa, Florida, the instance of a Dr. Samuel Arian, who is a Palestinian.
Right.
I'm wondering if you have any knowledge of that or could comment about this kind of gulag, of this procedural gulag that he has fallen into, and it is truly that.
I'm not familiar with this case. I know there was a fellow, was it in Tampa, the guy who was acquitted? Was that the...
but he's still in prison.
Right, but he was tried, acquitted, but not released because now they want to deport him. That actually is commonplace. That happens quite frequently. People, when they end the criminal justice system, can be held for years. The law says that you're not supposed to be, and there was just a case in Washington, D.C. where they had held a guy for like 5.5 years because they couldn't find a country to deport him to, and a judge finally said, no, you got to release him. But now he's caught up in that. I view that as a slightly different kettle of fish because he's at least in an established legal system. He has a right to a lawyer. He has a right to have his family visit him. People know about him. And one thing that I think Joanne's going to talk about is there are people in CIA custody, at least we knew they were in CIA custody, who have now disappeared. And for the first time in this country, we knew they were there, and now, where are they? Nobody seems to know. It's the first time you have disappeareds in this country.
One last question, Dan. Will a change of administration eliminate Guantanamo?
Okay, thanks everybody. The question was, will a change in administration end Guantanamo? The lesson of history, maybe some. The lesson of history is not promising in that regard. It's obvious to me and to careful observers that the administration is just desperate to get out of this. I sometimes say to people that the administration is as much a prisoner of this policy as the prisoners. And all they want to do is hand off this baton and let it be somebody else's problem. But once it is somebody else's problem, I'm not convinced that there is the political will to shutter Guantanamo.